South Africa has been given the mammoth task of presiding over the International Civil Aviation Organization Assembly. Khoza, the CEO of the SA Civil Aviation Authority, was elected unanimously by the International Civil Aviation Organization member states to serve as president of the 41st Assembly, which will run for 2 weeks. Khoza is the first woman to be elected to serve this specialized international body. For some reaction to the development, we're joined now by Deputy Minister of Transport, Sindisiwe Chikunga. Very good afternoon to you. Thank you so much for your time. South Africa's just been re-elected back to this governing council of the ICAO Assembly. You were leading the delegation. What does this mean overall for South Africa?
You know, we are so excited. 3 things have happened for South Africa ever since we arrived here in Canada on Sunday. First one, as you have said, Ms. Khoza was elected as the president of the Assembly. First time ever to have a woman presiding over this important highest decision-making body of the ICAO, which is, of course, an agency of the United Nations, specialized agents of the United Nations. We're very happy about that because she actually made history, not only for herself as a professional, not only for South Africa, not only for Africa, but for all women in aviation and women of the world. So we're very excited about that. That's the first one. The second, also, we met with U.S., we were audited for safety, aviation safety by U.S. on the basis of our bilateral air service agreement that we have with them. They've actually informed us that South Africa remains in category 1 of U.S., which is something that is good news for South Africa, because what it actually means is that aircrafts flying from South Africa will continue to fly to U.S. If we had actually received category 2, because it will either be category 1 or category 2, it would actually mean that immediately there will be no flight flying from South Africa to U.S. But that would also attract other regions such as Europe to begin to say, do we have to come to South Africa and audit South Africa for safety? And therefore, this excited us very much. So we are one of the countries that have actually been audited by the U.S. in terms of our BASA to continue to fly, and we are given a green light, which is category 1. That is very exciting, and thanks to SACA. The third one is this one today, that we've now been voted. We actually received, we are in position number 4 of the 12 countries that were voted into part 2 of the ICAO Council. What this means is that South Africa and Africa will continue to air its views in that important body that ensures the implementation of the decisions of the Assembly, but also prepares for what the next Assembly will have to resolve on, looking at the outcomes of audits and looking at what is happening in the world, informed by the many pandemics and every disasters that we actually seen. That important body prepares for that. But it therefore means that South Africa will be able to air its voice, but also to take information and share with us so that we are not left behind. It makes the principle of ICAO, that is no country left behind, real. We are so excited and happy that we are again continuing to serve in the council of ICAO. So yes, these are the good news, the best news for South Africa. We're flying our flag very high here with the president, with Bobby sitting in front and taking decisions that are not easy. We just came from a plenary that definitely was not easy. It called for, I think, about an hour, having to come to a decision because we have unprecedented issues that we have to deal with.
Absolutely. Deputy Minister, if you'll allow me there just to step in, we'll talk about the unprecedented issues. I think that's a very important aspect to also focus on within our conversation. With all the excitement and the hype around this, does this now show, is it perhaps an indication of how the world at large perceives the standards of aviation in South Africa?
It actually shows confidence that the world has in South Africa. That is for sure. Let me just say this. When we were audited by ICAO, in 2011 for security. We received above 80%. I probably want to repeat this. And that is the target that ICAO has actually set for 2023. We achieved and met the target in 2003. And that therefore means that we're now working towards achieving the 90%, which is the target that ICAO has set for 2034. We are working towards achieving that. We've just been audited by ICAO for security this year, for security in aviation. We're waiting for the report in that regard. And we're hoping that we're probably going to actually be above 90% or at least above 80%, which is a target set by ICAO. So yes, we're doing exceptionally good. When it comes to aviation, South Africa has performed at 87.3%. That is way back. And we will be audited again by ICAO next year in March. But like I've said, we've also been audited for safety in aviation by US, and we are in category 1. That gives us a strength, but also it says even big countries, big economies such as US have confidence in South Africa. It was for the first time, honest, I must say, that at the dinner of Africa, I was invited by the Secretary of State of U.S. to come and greet her. But also we were invited by U.S. to come and meet with them. It's the first time that it happens. But for us, it says this is confidence that the countries of the world are showing towards South Africa. Africa, and of course women as such. We are excited. I must just say that I'm very happy. We're just coming from the elections. That is where we have announced we are exceptionally excited.
How did the voting process go in terms of perhaps just breaking down the numbers on which countries opted and voted for South Africa?
What happens, you have got, in fact, it's 36 countries that make up the council. Out of 36, you have got Part 1 countries. There are 11. Those are countries that are big, that actually manufacture aircraft, big in aviation. So it will be your US, your France, your Germany, your UKs, and of this world. Those are in Part 1. And then in Part 2, it will be 12 countries. These are countries, these are states that are contributing in the provision of facilities and infrastructure in the aviation sector. And South Africa is there, is in Part 2. Then, of course, you've got, and there are 12 of them. Then in Part 3, they are 13. These are countries that in the main are representing regions. For instance, from the SADC region, we have Zimbabwe representing SADC region. You have got other states in Africa, for instance, representing other regions in Africa. That will also count for Europe. That will also count for Latin America, count for other regions per se. So that those will be in part 3. We are in Part 2 as South Africa because of our contribution in aviation. The only thing that would probably make South Africa not to qualify to be in Part 1 is that for now we are not making aircrafts. And that will be all. Otherwise, on other matters, I think we could actually match some of the countries that are in Part 1. But of course, the fact of the matter is that we are not manufacturing aircrafts at the moment. And that is why we'll therefore be in Part 2. And that will just be the difference. So yes, if you have 177 countries voting, and at least you are able to amass 151 votes, you think you have performed exceptionally well. Singapore will always take position 1. Because of the many reasons, of course, it's doing very well that is in Part 2. It's doing very well, but of course, it's got all other islands that vote for Singapore.
Yes.
And of course, itself doing exceptionally well
Deputy Minister,
in aviation.
Just looking at the issues that we have back home, the many challenges that state-owned airline SAA has, for instance, faced. I mean, there were also questions around capacity. Does SAA have the capacity to meet demand in South Africa? I understand that they issued a statement saying that they are working towards that. With this celebration outside of South Africa, how does that then bolster the aviation and airlines here back home in terms of, making the airlines stronger and allowing the industry to thrive?
In fact, for instance, what it means for SAA, that if it wants to resume its route between South Africa and America, it can do it yesterday. Because in terms of what US has given us, the category 1, it means if they want to fly to US as they were doing in the past before COVID-19, they can do that immediately. So what it actually means is that any airline in South Africa or from South Africa or belonging to South Africa can fly to any country with ease, because countries of the world has shown confidence in South Africa, and that our standards, whether for safety or security, are very high. And therefore no country would have found it difficult to actually allow any aircraft or airline flying from South Africa. So yes, it will depend on whether the airlines, including SAA, are willing to come to the party. What we are doing as government, but also as state-owned companies and the representatives of South Africa here, is to say, South Africa, when it comes to aviation, we meet all the standards and recommended practices as, of course, are stated by ICAO. And that is what we are saying. So it depends on the airlines on whether they take the advantage of the environment that we have created, a conducive environment that we are creating for them, in terms of knowing that South Africa is safe, in terms of knowing that South Africa is secure, in terms of knowing that if you're talking about passengers, we make everything possible, that we don't fly people that are a risk to other countries. But also, even if you talk about cargo, that we have all the measures that we put in place to ensure the security and safety of our cargo and security and safety of our passengers. So yes, the airlines are there. They can take advantage of this environment that we've created. We can't do it for them. They've got to do it for themselves.
Yeah. And also looking at some of the other matters, environmental matters are ones that will also be really important coming under the spotlight. Issues like green fuel, which effectively adds to matters like the pricing of airline tickets. That conversation, when it comes to the environment and also looking to the future, what's South Africa's stance?
When it comes to issues related to pricing and tickets and all that of course will depend on airlines. That's one thing. But of course it also depends on the council itself to say what is it that we think we should do. It will be very difficult for South Africa, for instance, to say to a United States airline, you've got to charge people like this. It will be very difficult. But when it comes to tariffs in the country, then we have bodies that are responsible for approving or disapproving tariffs as requested by our state-owned companies, your AXAs, your ATNS, and so on and so forth. We do have a way of controlling that. But for any airline to say, I charge so much for flying from point A to point B, it would be very difficult, because it's not only South African airlines that are flying in South Africa. Government to say this must be the cost of, whilst of course you have bodies in South Africa in terms of the constitution that if they think that there's collusion, they can question that, they can do it even with the airlines. But beyond that, that depends on airlines, informed by other people.
So when it comes to the tasks and the focal areas, given the situation in South Africa on aviation, the impacts of COVID-19, what will Poppy Khoza be looking to improve and enhance and bolster with this position on ICAO?
Poppy Khoza is the president of the assembly, and in South Africa she is the director of civil aviation, that is the regulator. But also you then have AXA, which is actually responsible for all the international airports in South Africa. You have got the ATNS that is responsible for our airspace. What we are concerned about is for us to say, how do we ensure that we achieve the status of what we were before COVID-19, but also surpass that? We think that is important. In terms of traffic, of aircrafts that fly to South Africa, and as such bringing tourists, because you can't talk tourists without aviation. how do we ensure that we bring back that traffic, which is very critical? And this is the matter that we are discussing as South Africa, looking at everything that is possible. But what else are we going to do? Because during COVID, we learned some lessons that is possible, like I have this conversation with you. I'm not in South Africa, wherever you are. And many of the countries are adopting online meetings now. So that actually impact on the number of passengers that will fly from point A to point B, or business people flying from point A to point B for meeting purposes. And therefore, what else must we do in order to ensure that we continue to fly? And that is where the issue of air cargo comes handy, to say probably there are things that need to fly and not to be on the road, nor even on rail. And what are those things that we need to do within the country and also outside South Africa? What is it that we need to do? And these are the matters that we assist with, that we are discussing, so as to ensure that we actually move, and in fact, we ensure that aviation returns to where it was, but also.
Absolutely. Perhaps we're going to have to leave it there. Deputy Minister of Transport, Sindisiwe Chikunga, thank you for your time. Of course, that connection not coming out so strongly towards the end there on the Deputy Minister's end. We leave it there on that conversation, but there's a lot more.